Hello friends, I am here with my video on Sunrise on the Reaping. I love this book, man. First off, my name is Aminoso. I'm kind of late to the party in terms of Hunger Games, follow-ups, prequels, essentially. I still have not read A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I do have the book, but it was in storage for a while. I just got it out recently, and as soon as I got it out of storage, Sunrise on the Reaping was released. And of course, I love Haymitch. He was my absolute favorite in the original trilogy. I just really love him. So I was really eager to read this one first. I loved it. I will say I don't personally mind spoilers in my my reviews, breakdowns, that kind of thing. So I am going to include them in this video. I will say that I will break them up into non-spoilered and spoilered. First thing I want to say is that Suzanne Collins has most definitely established a voice for her characters by this point. She has established the world. She's thought everything through. She's had the lore laid out and everything, and you can definitely tell between the original trilogy and these prequels that she's making that all of that has been established now. I'm sure she had inklings, she had setups and stuff like that for the original trilogy, but it has been so kind of picked apart and really developed, and it really shines through in this book especially. I believe in A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, the movie, we get an official map of Panem. When overlaid with the map of the continental United States, you can definitely tell what districts are in which areas and stuff like that. And that puts District 12 smack dab in Appalachia, which Haymitch is an Appalachian boy. I will tell you that right now. He is very cultured. There were direct tie-ins with the geography of the Appalachian Mountains and stuff, and sayings, pastimes. There's a lot of Appalachian food in this book as well, which is really interesting, but it's like his comfort food, essentially. During the original trilogy, not that this is anything bad, but Katniss was very much teenage girl dystopian novel POV. There was not too much cultural tie-ins with Appalachia that I saw, or remember anyway. But it is very definitely established in Sunrise on the Reaping. Sunrise on the Reaping is probably the most horrific addition of them to the story yet, which makes sense. I believe in the past Suzanne Collins said something along the lines of that she didn't have any plans to write anything more unless she had something to say. And she definitely had something to say with this book. She had a lot of things to say with this book, actually. Very interesting. She did not pull any punches about just how gruesome this universe of hers is. Obviously, we know that Haymitch wins. Spoiler alert, he wins. So it really sets up Collins with some really fantastic opportunities to create a lot of suspense and, you know, orchestrate tension in terms of how the tributes would die and when, why, that kind of thing. One issue that I had with the book is the character of Lenore Dove. As a character, I don't think she's bad. She definitely has a very strong personality that comes through. Unfortunately, because of the amount of time that we spend with her in the narrative, which I'll say it now, is very little, because similar to the original Hunger Games book, Haymitch gets raped towards the very beginning of his book. So because we have very little time to spend with her narratively, we don't really get to know her that well as a person. We mostly know her through a few snippets of time that she has with Haymitch, as well as majorly Haymitch's experiences, thoughts, feelings towards her, memories, that kind of thing. Which unfortunately means that just because of just how much Haymitch loves her, matched with the kind of personality that she has, she low-key kind of comes off as like manic pixie dream girl. So he goes on about how she is his great love, and just because we don't spend that time with her, like to get to know her as that, I couldn't really bring myself to care for her too much. We know that Haymitch is essentially the town drunk, and he gets that way because he lost everyone after the games. And he tells Katniss in one of the books, maybe the first one, they rewatch previous games, one of those being Haymitch's, and he tells them, he's like, I lost my mother and younger brother and my girl 2 weeks after the game they were dead, because of the stunt that I pulled with the force field, is what he says, which is how he wins his games. So we know that they're gone, but we don't know how. All we know is that they're fine by the time he leaves for the games. So the problem is, whatever happens to her, it only makes you feel because of Haymitch. It only makes you emotional because of Haymitch, because of what it'll do to him, and because of what you know it does to him, and because of the things he kind of describes afterwards. So you really feel for him in that department, because you've spent all this time with him, you've spent almost 400 pages with him, and all this terrible stuff happens to him. I could not care less about Lenorda. I'm so sorry. She's a manic pixie dream girl. Alternately, Haymitch spends plenty of time with the other tributes, of which there are twice the amount, because he is in the 50th Hunger Games, second quarter quell, which means that they've doubled up the amount of tributes. Instead of the usual 24, it's now 48, because they're asking for 2 girls and 2 boys from each district instead of just 1 each. And with his 3 other tribute, district tributes, as well as the people he kind of makes alliances with, you get to know a lot of people, and you get to have a lot of time and interactions with them, and it makes all of their all of their passings so much more devastating. It is very, very incredibly upsetting when they die, just because of how fleshed out they are. I have seen some criticism online because people have been saying that there are other characters from previous books that appear in this book, and they are essentially likening it to fan service, and saying that it's unrealistic, that he would have all these people that he knows, and blah blah blah. I just want to say that it is incredibly realistic. This is 24 years before Katniss's first games, and it is described in book 3 that after the bombing of District 12, 800 people from District 12 find refuge in District 13. They describe 90% of District 12 population as having died in the process of that. Which means that in District 12, and the bombing happened, the population in District 12 was only 8,000 people. Which, I don't know if you know how small of a number that is. That is an incredibly small number. Katniss describes them having 1 school for the district. It is incredibly natural that Haymitch would know everybody. It makes sense. Like, they're like, he wouldn't have all this connection. Yeah, he would, actually. Really kind of especially devastating when you know that, when you find out that Haymitch was actually best friends with Katniss's dad. This book also gives names to Katniss's parents. Katniss's mom is Astrid March, and then her dad is Burdock Everdeen. Haymitch and Effie meet in this book. Haymitch is reaped when he's 16 years old. Effie, I believe someone estimated it to be about 5 years older than him. She's already in college. They meet for the first time and they have some interactions, and even back then, Haymitch grows kind of a soft spot for her, even though she has been fully entrenched in the capital propaganda simply because of her upbringing. And Haymitch understands that she was a product of her environment over anything else. She's really kind to the tribute. She's understanding, accommodating. She views them as people. She treats them as such. And he really, really appreciates that. He kind of has a soft spot for her. Even when she like says very pro-capital things, he's like, yeah, well, okay. And that is definitely in contrast to most of the other capital people in this book, who view the districts and its citizens especially as the dirt beneath their shoe. Haymitch is asked at one point, what would he want to get out of the games? And his mentors are like, don't say, you know, live, because obviously everyone wants that. If there's anything else you can get out of the games, you know, acknowledging the fact that the probability is not great that you'll survive, what else is something that you want to get out of the games? And Haymitch's answer is, I don't know yet, I admit. I guess, for starters, by reminding the audience that we're human beings, the way they talk about us, piglets, beasts. They called my fingernails claws. You see how those kids outside the gym looked at us, like they think of us as animals, and they think of themselves as superior. So it's okay to kill us. But the people in the capital aren't better than us, or smarter. So he has a bit of a soft spot for Effie. Obviously, it having been a Haymitch POV, it really, really develops his character a lot. But the worst thing is, you can almost see what kind of person he would have turned out to be before the games. He has such good instincts, and he has such a really, really good and like noble soul almost. There are times when he has an instinct, he immediately goes for it. And there are other times when he has an instinct and he knows that that is not the best idea to do. So he rethinks it, and he, you know, makes some rash decisions sometimes. He's 16 years old. But there are some times when he gets burned. He learns and he goes, okay, I'm not going to do that again. I can't get a similar outcome this time, so I'm going to take it a little bit slower this time. And there are a lot of opportunities where he could just do something essentially to save his own skin, and he doesn't. He pretty much always tries to go with what he feels is morally right. Obviously, his experiences during and after the games traumatize him irreparably, which is super, super depressing, because at one point, Haymitch describes himself as not much of a drinker. He actually works with somebody in 12 to distill bootleg liquor and distribute it, and they get paid that way. And he has a lot of commentary on the kind of people who get addicted, about how they do it to numb feelings, to get away from experiences, to just kind of send it all away for a while. They spend their entire paychecks on it. They have very little money, but they always have, you know, some money for alcohol. And he doesn't view it very favorably. So he helps distribute it, essentially, but he has no interest in drinking himself. That is it for the non-spoilered section. So everything from here on out will have spoilers. I really, really, really recommend that you read this book beforehand. It's such a great book. It is so fantastic. She really popped off with this one, I'll say that. Starting with our spoilers, this book pretty much confirms that reapings are rigged. And they are especially used to target those whose snow fields have to be put back in line. Someone mentioned that at one point Katniss notes that Victor's kids are reaped suspiciously often. But this one for sure. For sure. They are definitely rigged in this one. Of the two reapings that Haymitch is involved in, the one being at the 50th and the Quarter Quell, the 50th and the 75th, only one of them is reaped legitimately, which is the 75th. Haymitch's Hunger Games, there is another boy who is reaped before him, and he runs, and he is immediately shot in the head and killed. And we learned that there is a 5-minute broadcasting delay, and that means that they have plenty of time to cover it up, essentially. District 12 escort stops everything, and they go over there, clean the body away. Everybody that has blood on them from the event is put into nearby buildings, and Haymitch, unfortunately, happens to be someone standing close by. And she turns to him and she says, "What's your name?" And he says, "Haymitch Abernathy." And she goes, "Haymitch Abernathy," and she writes it down on a little slip of paper. And she goes back up at the stairs, and the entire time he's just like, what is happening? And she gets all makeuped up, and she tells everyone to quiet, and they start it from the top. And they recreate the female pool, and they recreate the pool, and he is raped. And then at that point, it kind of hits, he's like, oh, I'm in the Hunger Games now. That's awesome. But yeah, it was definitely not legit. It was definitely not legitimate. What I find really fascinating about this book is that Collins said that she would write books if she had something to say. And one of them is about the importance about exposure to literature and differing opinions and different backgrounds. Just the variety of the experiences that people kind of have in life. She does this by highlighting that Plutarch is in this book, and he is part of District 12's film crew. But he is also working with BT, who is one of the mentors for this game. They had kind of a plan. So Haymitch is really not sure what to think about Plutarch because he is capital, but it is conveyed that Plutarch, his family, maintained their library, which is apparently a huge thing because during the dark days, during the war, most families burned books for fuel. But Plutarch's family, the Heaven Bees, they made a point to hold on to theirs. Plutarch was raised reading these stories and being exposed to all of these things and learning about culture and the way things were before. Of course, he's on the good side. There's quite a bit of commentary on banned books and like book burnings, literal allusions to book burnings done by, you know, dictatorships and other kinds of regimes. Sunrise also has programmed mutts, which obviously mutts are nothing new. Programmed mutts, yeah, still nothing new really. These ones are programmed to target specific tributes, and even if they are threatened, harmed, or killed by other tributes while they're in the course of attacking their target, they will not budge. They don't react at all. Which essentially lends credibility to the idea that even the victors themselves are rigged, because you know that if the capital can and does do this, in order to win the games, you have to essentially be allowed to win. Because one huge thing about this book is the message on propaganda, on censorship, on crafting specific narratives to fit the message that a specific group wants to tell. One huge thing is they make a plan for Haymitch and his kind of personality in order to stand out during the interviews at the very beginning, and they do it. He pulls it off really well. They kind of go for like a rascal angle. They kind of play into the bootleg hooch making, kind of make him a little rascal, troublemaker. And he notes at the very end when they are going over all the events of the games, which are not in order. They make no sense at times. They make him seem as like a very self-preservation seeking individual. And he says that especially during the interviews, they make him look like an ass. They make him look terrible, which obviously is the very different message that he knows for a fact was broadcast during the games. And he knows for a fact that there are a lot of things with the recap in the Victor's Tour that do not line up with the actual recap of the games. Even ignoring the fact that that they will be censored during broadcasting, just the order of events that they try to make, it makes no sense. Like it doesn't happen. And he's looking at the crowd's reaction during this recap after he wins, and he's like, all of you know that this is false. This is all fake. This is all incorrect. And all of you know that. You have to know that. And none of you care. Because they're so entrenched in the fact that, one, this is marketed as entertainment over everything else. And two, that they don't care. They're perfectly content, you know, absorbing whatever is fed to them. They don't really care for that critical thinking to realize that something is wrong. And it just kind of showed how effective the capital was at that kind of propaganda. There are a lot of things in this book that do not go to plan. First off, the reaping. Second off, one of District 12's tributes, one of the girls, dies before the games begin. She dies because a horse stampede, essentially, with all the chariots. One of the horses got spooked by some sort of firecracker thing that one of the citizens set off. She's like launched out of the chariot and she dies. She cracks her skull open and she dies. And they replace her with what they theorize and kind of confirm later to be a District 11 girl, who is probably younger than the character who died, Luella, who was 13 at the time. They imagined her to be below 12. But she has had extensive plastic surgery on her face in order to seem very identical to her. And Haymitch is so distraught by Luella's death because he knew her. He was really good friends with her. She was his sweetheart. They weren't together, obviously. She was 13, he was 16, but she had a little bit of a crush on him when they were like real young. She said that she was going to be his sweetheart, and then she immediately moved on to another crush, but that nickname kind of stuck with them. And she was very much like a little sister figure, and that's kind of where the sweetheart nickname originates for Katniss, because Luella wore her hair in little twin braids, and that's one of the ways that Haymitch first sees Katniss after her father dies. She has squirrels and rabbits, and she's trading their meat in the hob, and has their little twin pigtails. So when they interact for the first time after her reaping, and he calls her sweetheart, it kind of slips out. Like it's kind of she just reminds him so much of Luella, who is so dear to him and who he lost in a really tragic way. And it kind of makes it even sweeter when she highlights at one point that he says good job sweetheart, and she runs to him for a hug, and she's like, that didn't even sound like sarcastic to me this time. Like I think he's just being genuine with that. She's not like overanalyzing it anymore. And it was never intended to be like sarcastic or poking fun or anything. But Luella essentially has a replacement. The replacement, who they call Lulu, who Haymitch calls Lulu because he cannot stand like looking at her and calling her Luella. Lulu is emaciated. She has a different physique, a little bit of a different physique, but she's a close enough body double that they give her plastic surgery to give her Luella's face, and they send her in there, and she's brainwashed. She's so mentally broken that the only thing she can say at first is, I'm Luella, I'm the tribute from District 12. Repeats that over and over and over again. I'm Luella McCoy, I'm a District 12 tribute. So they call her Lulu, and everyone, all the other victors who had seen her die in the games, they kind of play it off because they know that there will be repercussions if they kind of spread around the fact that she was replaced. They know for a fact that she's bugged. She has a little mic or a little bug in her ear that can hear them all when they're all talking. It feeds her instructions. And if she misbehaves, it sets out like a really loud screech in her ear, kind of like shuts her down. As well as she has some sort of medication pump attached to her chest that pumps out medication. They use it at one point for like a sedative. So she is treated very, very horribly, and they kind of adopt her and they treat her with very gently. It's dangerous to let the other district's tributes know that she's a plant and like a replacement essentially, so they play it off as her having extensive brain damage, and they kind of believe that. They believe it enough to not really care to look into it too much. The message on the propaganda, the censorship, it really is interesting in terms of the narration style. There are some people who argue that first-person narrators are never reliable narrators because we are essentially only given the narrative through their understanding of it, which I disagree with. But with an unobservant narrator like Katniss, we are now very privy to the fact that there could be so much more happening that we are unaware of. She has zero awareness of it, therefore we don't know. There are plenty of messages in this book that Collins really loads up on not even including like the broader propaganda angle. She has snuck in an anti-artificial intelligence passage in it's on page 201. Plutarch is talking about how they had AI in the past and it was like banned, like outlawed, and he's thinking, oh, all this stuff that we can do with it, but essentially they said that it had the potential to become too dangerous, so they dismantled it and they forbade its use, which I thought was really, really interesting. There's some George Orwell quotes at the very beginning of this book, combined with the fact that it is revealed at the very, very end of the book, Haymitch's 50th games, the arena is in the shape of an eye. So the pupil in the middle is the cornucopia. It is surrounded by a field of green meadows, and then on either side, in this kind of like a triangle shape, forming a couple of edges of the circle, are a heavily wooded area and the mountain that eventually turns into a volcano. It's in the giant shape of an eye, coupled with the quotes at the very beginning. It's very reminiscent of George Orwell's 1984 book, which is about censorship, propaganda, being spied on by the government, controlled in their actions. There are acceptable things to do and, you know, things that are not acceptable, and you will be heavily punished, and Big Brother is always watching you, in terms of totalitarian control, as well as a great example of a panopticon, which, for those who are unaware of what a panopticon is, it kind of doubles. It originated as a type of prison that was built, and it's essentially in a shape of like a bell dome, like glass jar, a bell jar. It has the prisons circling the outside, and there's one row of cells around the outside, all the levels down, and there's the little courtyard in the middle, and in the very, very middle of the prison is a watchtower, and you could be seen anywhere on any of those watchtowers, and it's surrounded by windows where they can see out but you can't see in, and it is constantly guarded and constantly monitored, and it is designed in such a way that the watchtower has a clear view of every single cell in the prison. And the idea is they could relax on the manpower, and they could cut the amount of guards needed to patrol, because in the reality that they could be watched, or could be being watched at any single time, the prisoners begin to act as if they are being watched all of the time, which essentially turns them into their own jailers. They're kind of self-governing, self-policing in the way that they act and behave, because they become so paranoid because they don't know when they're being watched and when they are. So you begin to act as if you are, always. It was kind of heavily criticized. I believe someone described it as being so monstrously effective, it's like inhumane. like it works, but for a way that it is so, it's like a huge human rights violation. You're essentially gaslighting yourself at that point. And the term panopticon has essentially been moved into a term that means that kind of idea of where you have to behave as if you're being watched because you don't know if you are or you're not. And people use it in terms of stuff like CCTV, but mostly nowadays it's in terms of people filming in public when it comes to people filming in public for pranks, for interview videos, or whatever. When viral videos get spread around where people are embarrassing themselves or get caught in a really bad situation, say something, do something, or anything that might be, viral worthy, it's a breach of privacy, essentially. No one should be terrified every time they leave the house of being filmed and distributed in a mass way for seemingly innocuous human things. That's what it's used for nowadays, but it is very especially effective in this book. It's very much a panopticon. You know, you're constantly being watched and listened to and surveilled and stuff like that, that you can't really act the way that you should act. They even have a camera in the bathroom, like while they're getting ready in their little apartment building. This one, in terms of one of Collins' messages, kind of ties into what I'm about to say next as well. The covey, which is obviously discussed more in A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, they're nomadic, traveling, musical culture who were forced to settle in 12 during the war, because no one could be outside the districts. I don't know if this is revealed in that book, but it is revealed in Sunrise on the Reaping that they killed all of the adult covey members. So they're all the ones that are surviving, all of the oldest ones were children when the war happened. But the covey, their naming scheme is, the first name is a name from a ballad or a song, and the second name is kind of color. So in Ballad, it was Lucy Gray. In Sunrise, Haymitch's girl is Lenore Dove, which dove is a kind of white color that's kind of pearly blue, purpley, really light color. Lenore's name song is from a song version of Edgar Allan Poe's poem The Raven. And the raven in the poem it's a metaphor for grief. You try to question it and it never gives solid responses. It always shows up in inopportune times and interrupts things when you're trying to do stuff. And the last chapter is fantastic with this, because in between sections of Haymitch describing how things go for him after the reaping, from the reaping to the Victor's tour to the reaping the next year, it just kind of chronicles his spiral into madness, his spiral into depression and grief. And in between these paragraphs describing the events of that life and that time span are interspersed with quotes from The Raven, the poem. And it just happens over and over and over again, and it's cyclical, and he pulls deeper down into this darkness. And Haymitch essentially becomes the man in the poem, because he's haunted by his lost love, Lenore, and essentially becomes a drunkard because of it. The last chapter was just so incredibly effective. It was really, really heartbreaking, because you see all this stuff happen to him, and he goes, I pick up the bottle, I hit the bottle even harder, I get drunk, and the only time I can stop is until the next train comes to restock. It's really, really depressing in a really, really, really well done way. I will say the geese at the end of Mockingjay seemed like a really, really, really random hobby for Haymitch to pick up, until it doesn't. Because geese were Lenore Dove's favorite animal. She had a flock of them, and she absolutely loved them. And they didn't care for Haymitch. They tolerated him when he had food, but she adored her geese. Katniss, there's an epilogue at the end of this book, and Katniss is actually the one who gives Haymitch the geese. And she says that she raided a few different nests so that they're unrelated and they should be able to procreate just fine. Haymitch describes Lenore and the other tributes that become his allies with birds, and they're always reminiscent of freedom, peace, tranquility, stuff like that. Lenore Dove is obviously Dove, and I believe it's district, I can't even remember which number district it is. At one point he asks them for an alliance, and they agree, and he says that they start following him around like little puppies, and he describes them as his doves, because this year all of the tributes are color-coded, and their color is that really light, or similar to that really light pearlescent color dove that his his Lenore is named after. And he describes them as his doves. And every time he references one of them, he says, "one of my doves." It is absolutely adorable and really, really heartbreaking, but so sweet. It is so sweet to hear. Haymitch's character arc changes incredibly drastically. And you can kind of see a return to his 16-year-old self, or who that self would have been in book 3 when it comes to doing what's right. He's an advocate of doing what's right, but he also has that that previous experience of knowing where it can get you, that he warns Katniss about constantly. Some people actually theorize that for the movies, Woody Harrelson got some sort of info on Haymitch's background or something, because they are now pulling up clips of his acting in the movies and tying it to what we know with Haymitch now. And people are fully convinced that Suzanne Collins gave him some sort of acting pointers or guidance, or coaching on acting as adult Haymitch based off of previously unreleased origin information. Which, if that's not the case, it is extremely interesting. That is fantastic coincidences that he has in that movie. I will leave off on saying this. At the very end of the book, Haymitch talks about Lenore, and even though she is dead, every time he has talked about her afterwards, it has always been in the present tense. It is always as if he is talking to her, being visited by her, experiencing and moving through life with her, that kind of thing. It's super devastating, but it's such a good characterization just to let you know how much she meant to him. This thing between them that was geese mate for life, and he was like, she is my one and only, she is my other half. We mated for life and long after. Because directly after her death, obviously, into his spiral of alcoholism, he was haunted by her, essentially, in his dreams. Because he feels like he is at fault for her death. He says, "When Lenore Dove comes to me now, she's not angry or dying, so I think she's forgiven me. She's grown older with me, her face etched with fine lines, her hair touched with gray, like she's been living her life beside me as the years passed, instead of lying in her grave. Still so rare and radiant. I fulfilled my promise about the reaping, or at least lent a hand, but she says I can't come to her yet. I have to look after my family." He reveals that essentially this book is him telling his story to others like Katniss and Peeta at the very end, after the war. And he's like, I don't really see the point to relive all of this loss and pain, but I couldn't help but talk about Burdock, Katniss's father. I couldn't help but talk about my love and Luella and, you know, Maisie and Wyatt and all the others. It was just so, so good. That is my notes on Sunrise on the Reaping. I can definitely tell you a lot more about it, but I will leave that there because this video is probably already long enough. So, thanks for sitting here hanging out with me. I really, really hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope you read the book yourself because it is fantastic. It is probably, I really love Catching Fire, but this is probably my favorite Hunger Games book. It is very emotionally impacting in a way that I was not prepared for. And I saw TikToks of people sobbing after reading it, and I was like, that won't happen to me. I rarely ever do that while reading books. And I did it at like 4 o'clock in the morning. I went in, I pulled an 8-hour work shift, and I had to have my husband drive me to work because I was so worn out, both mentally and physically, from reading this book. So, I'll leave it there. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I did have a Heavenly Tyrant video, my Iron Widow sequel copy over there. I read it and then I recorded a video on it, or I tried to. And I recorded it all in one go, and then the entire video corrupted. It was almost an hour long. So I'm taking that as a sign to probably condense things down a little bit, as well as plan things out beforehand. So I don't ramble as much. I'm planning on doing a little bit more cuts as opposed to the entire length. And I'll see if that kind of helps better with condensing things down, especially when I lose my train of thought and stuff, which I am apt to do. And I now am taking notes for all of my books, so I have topics pre-planned, things I want to touch on, make sure that I get to everything I want to talk about in a video. So I'm going to try to do that. Hopefully that'll be a bit better. But yeah, hope you had a good time. I'll see y'all later.